Hello there. Welcome to the Vandal Factory podcast, where we interview people about music and theatre and poetry and changing the world one piece of art at a time.
Now, in our usual episodes, we have so much that we want to pack in, so we have to cut out a lot out of these lovely conversations and interviews that we have with fantastic, interesting people. So, you lucky little raptors, you, in the factory floor cuts, this is where you get to hear the full, unedited interview for your listening pleasure.
Our guest in this episode was Sarah Brigham. She's the artistic director at Derby Theatre. She talks about her roots in community work in Leeds, where me and Natalie are based, in East Leeds. She talks about a recent show she directed called Welfare, and she talks about creating roots into a building for socially engaged theatre work. Me and Sarah go way back. She was my youth theatre director when I was a young person growing up in York, and she really taught us about making work that mattered, right? It felt like every show we did was political, or at the very least it was really high quality excellence. And
that's why loads of you have gone on to have careers in the arts and been really successful.
Yeah.
She sorted you out.
She sorted us out. So we, in 2006, did a adaptation of Franz Kafka's The Trial, and this was the first time the youth theatre were invited to perform on the main stage of York Theatre Royal, and this was a really, really big deal at the time. And Sarah, let us know that, and she was like, this matters. This is this is like the bar is set really high, so we want this show to be the best it possibly can be. There's no cutting corners, there's no half measures, and the way she treated us like professionals, the way she treated us not like adults, she treated us as young people, but she respected us and she knew that we could do the best possible, is something I've really held on to throughout my career in the arts and poetry, of going, if we're going to do it, we're going to do it right. And she's worked across Derby and in Eastleigh and in Dundee, and she's taken that idea with her that community arts, that working with young people, that working with non-professional actors is just as important, if not sometimes more important, than a quote-unquote professional show. So that's really special.
If you're into your theatre, we also recommend that you go all the way back to the beginning of the Vandal Factory podcast journey and listen to episode number 1, where we talked to theatre director Roisin McBrien. Or you might want to listen to episode 23, where we talked to Red Ladder Theatre Company, who Sarah used to work for back when she started her incredible career.
This interview was taken from episode 31. If you want to hear a song chosen by Sarah, go check out that episode. Otherwise, please subscribe, find us on social media. This is a DIY independent podcast, so we don't have any financial support, so word of mouth massively helps. If you're in a WhatsApp group with a load of other theatre people and you think this is really interesting, share it, send it to a friend, put it on social media. Generally, it really, really does help us, and it really matters. Anyway, on with the interview. Hello, me and Natalie are sat on a Zoom call with the artistic director of Derby Theatre. It's Sarah Brigham. Hooray!
Hello.
I was like, is Sarah the first person we've interviewed who's been on the stage top 100? And then I looked up, and actually someone we interviewed on the very first episode was in the stage top 100. So it's not that special, really.
But have they been in it and then got dropped from it? I mean, hello. Much to my mother's distaste. It's a load of old nonsense, really. It's so I won't worry too much about that.
Sarah, we go way back because you taught me back in youth theatre. You directed me on a couple of shows. And we had someone who directed Natalie as a young person on a few months ago. And so I asked them, what was Natalie like as a young person to direct? So it's only fair we just double check how solid and dependable and positive I was when I was 16, 17, 18.
Natalie, all I need to say is he is exactly the same. And that's all you need to know. That's all you need to know.
I was going to guess but a bit not more nerdy, still nerdy. A bit more shy, a bit more a little bit less self-aware.
I think I was really sincere. Everything really mattered.
Yeah.
It's still just the same then, yeah. Sarah, I know you started also but before you were in York, you were
you started in Leeds, is that right? So we've got that connection as well, in that now, you know, me and Henry are both based in Seacroft and Chapel FM. So I just wanted to know a little bit more about that time in your life, and what were you doing bombing around in Leeds?
Yeah, so I graduated from Bretton Hall, which was part of Leeds University, but in Wakefield, the dusty highlight. So it was in the Yorkshire, what is now the Yorkshire Sculpture Park. So Leeds was the place you went for a night out. And then when I graduated, I moved there, and I started out as an actor, doing lots of different stuff, working in mainly in Leeds. I was working a lot in Seacroft, actually, in theatre education, theatre company, blah blah blah. We're based in Seacroft then. I was running South Leeds Youth Theatre, which was in Holbeck. I was working for a variety of companies, and then going off and doing acting stuff elsewhere as well. And then started working as a director, and doing a bit of work with Red Ladder, and what then became Freedom Studios, with Madden Ionis. So yeah, I was just kind of, yeah, living in Hyde Park. Well, actually, I started off living in Beeston, then I moved to Armley, then I moved to Hyde Park. So I lived all over Leeds. Lived in Morley for a bit as well. So yeah, just being there, being an artist, knocking on the door of what was then the West Yorkshire Playhouse, and not getting any answers. So just kind of, yeah, doing my own work, and yeah.
And that's where your roots were started, really, in terms of your community participation, education, that kind of world. Is that where you started picking up an interest in that?
I guess so. I think actually it was when I was in youth theatre in Hull. So I went to Hull Truck Youth Theatre, and Damien Cruden, who then went on to be AD at York and is now at Alnwick, was my youth theatre director. And I remember him, and Hull Truck Youth Theatre was free to attend, so it was totally open access. And I didn't really go, my family weren't theatre goers or anything like that. But I remember him saying, you can stand in this room and tell these four walls what you think, or you can stand on a stage and make a difference. And I was like, oh, that sounds cool. So that kind of ignited my understanding. And I was very political as a young person. So I think that ignited my understanding that theatre gives you a voice in a way that you don't have, on a day-to-day basis. And then when I graduated and I started doing work with people like the Blars and Proper Job and Red Ladder, and starting to see how theatre doesn't have to be in a proscenium arch, theatre and done in a certain way, that it can mean different things. That kind of, that started to propel me, really. And then working with South Leeds Youth Theatre was really transformational, because that again was a free access. It was funded by the Youth Service, and it was for anyone aged 13 to 21. And we had young mums in there. It was a real cross section of kind of Holbeck, Beeston, that area of South Leeds. And I just saw the impact that it made, and felt the impact that it made. And I guess felt for myself as well, as a kind of working class girl from Hull, that what theatre has given me. And so, yeah, just thinking about it in that sense, really, that's how, I think that's what ignited my belief in community, I suppose.
Well, a few weeks ago, Sarah, I went to see a show that was all about community at your lovely Derby Theatre, called Welfare. And we wanted to use that as a starting point to talk about community theatre, when actually you do have a big old building, and what that means to tell people's stories. So I don't know if you could just give us a summary of Welfare, the show.
Yeah, we're not flogging tickets anymore. This is just for your delight to hear about it. Yeah, so what Welfare is about is it's about the Derbyshire miners holiday camp, which was it began as a convalescent home and then became the holiday camp in 1939. That was built on the back of the convalescent home. It was the first time that miners were given paid holiday. It was kind of done on a kind of a Butlins blueprint, and became the blueprint for other holiday homes across the country. And miners were given the opportunity to go there for a week, paid holiday, which was the first time, provided by their workplace, bed, board, and entertainment. And it existed up until really the early 90s, when, with the demise of the coal mining industry, it went to. And so that's what it was about. And we kind of spanned the whole 100 years of its history and took that concept of that was an act of welfare, right? It was an act of welfare from the bosses of the NUM at that time to their people. And then we looked at how welfare then went through the DNA and the veins of both that camp and those working class people who attended there. So to give you an example, in 1956, during the Hungarian uprising, the miners gave the camp over to refugees from Hungary. They said, actually, we won't have a holiday. We'll open this up to refugees who've come over from Hungary. In 1953, when the North Sea floods hit the whole of the Northeast again, the miners gave up their holiday camp and said, actually, let's make this a refuge for those people who are without houses. So we kind of took it as an opportunity to look at this idea of welfare and what does that mean throughout the ages and what does that mean now? And again, it's one of those things where going back to what we were just talking about is like, yeah, so now I'm sat in a building that is a traditional theatre. It's a regional theatre. It seats 535. But how do you give that stage over to a community so that they can tell the stories that they're interested in? So it came about by, we're working with a local writer called Abby Zacharian. So Abby is from Derby, but she's mixed Armenian British heritage, Armenian Derby heritage, to be more specific. And so she was also interested in talking about what does that mean and how does, because quite often the story that we get from the working class is it's a very slim story of a white working class story. So she was interested in that multicultural story as well. And then the community who were talking to me wanted to talk about that camp. There's 2 Facebook pages that are dedicated to it. When I sit and talk to our community groups, it'd often come up as a subject. So we began by we did a call out and we asked for postcards from across the city just to give us their memories of the place. That's the first thing we did. Then we put on a bus trip to Skegness. So it's the camp is in Skegness, it's not in Derby. So we put on a bus trip to Skegness and we filled it full of ex-miners and all their families, and we all got on a bus and we went to Skegness, and we went to Maison Fou, who kind of creatively facilitated the day, and we played bingo on the way there and on the way back. We commissioned another writer called Andy Barrett to go around welfares, as in miners' welfares, pubs around Derbyshire to hear their stories. And he wrote an additional 4 plays that sat alongside the main stage production, which we put on, which were digital plays for people who couldn't leave the house. And then we worked with We Live Here, James Varney and We Live Here, and they're all about creating so they do a lot of work with like housing associations and archives of working class history and working class archives. And they created a kind of a program of people's stories. And then Abby took all of that material and shaped the play that you saw, Henry. And then that play had 10 professional actors in it, but it also had a local brass band in it of 30 players, and then a community company of 25. And that community company were a lot of people who had never stepped on the stage before. So if I think of the people, there was Phil, who was a fitter at Rolls-Royce, never stepped on the stage before. Why he decided to get involved, I don't know, but he did. There was people who had been to the camp as kids, and so they got involved because they were interested for that reason. There was a whole kind of range of stuff. And I suppose the way that I see it now is like, I imagine the theatre and I think, how many doors can you open other than the front door? Like, where can you sneak in another door? Do you know what I mean? Or another window that people might come through. And I just want our building to be a building full of doors and windows where people go, oh, that's interesting. I might bob my head in for that. I'm not really into seeing the play, but actually I'll tell you a story about whatever and you can write it up in a little magazine that'll go somewhere. That sounds great. So that's kind of, I suppose welfare was a really good example of how now we try to take a building and still play true to those original things that I experienced, as you said, Nat, when I was in Leeds with Red Ladder, Proper Job, The Blars, Self-Lead Youth Theatre. So yeah, that's kind of an example, really.
Something that I was really struck by was on Facebook how many positive, gushing comments the show had. And then on the night, the people sat either side of me were really loving it. The crowd were loving it. And someone in the interval told me how they thought the accents were spot on. They were really clear that it wasn't just Derby accents, it was Derbyshire accents, and how people often don't really see the nuance of that. And the show itself, I should say, is like big fun, lots of bingo and noise and music and interaction, and it's a big laugh. But that must make you really proud, Sarah, that those communities that you were telling that story, like were proud of it, because those Derby audiences will tell you what they think, and but you went through a process to there was lots of checks in place to make sure that you were listening to that story, and it was the story that needed to be told, right?
Yeah, and I think it's about removing ego from it. You know, like, was it the best piece of theatre I've ever directed? Probably not. Was it the piece of theatre that's touched the most people and got them talking and connected as a community? Probably yes. Do you know what I mean? And so you kind of need to judge your work on different categories and different criteria. Not to say that it was a bad piece of theatre. It was a good enough piece of work, but it was, it was made for the people by the people, for want of a better word. And so yeah, so I think it is about, I think as an artistic director of a venue, especially one that's in the regions, if that's what you want to call it, it's like, what's your purpose? Why are you here? Do you know what I mean? And who's paying your salary, actually? And it's the people of Derby. So that's the reason for being there. And sometimes you go off on an adventure and you're making a piece of great art. Sometimes you go off on an adventure and you're really touching a community story. And sometimes you're doing both. And that's possible as well. But yeah, I think that I was really proud of it for that reason. And there were people who came to see it 3 or 4 times. Like they came back, they're like, oh yeah, I've seen it. And I was like, do you know someone in the show? No, I just love it. And it's like, because they saw themselves represented, right? They just saw themselves on that stage. They heard their accent. They saw themselves. They heard their stories. And they were really interested in that. And I think Abby did something very clever, because she talked about, she did also get that story of, so Tiana's character, Kat, is who kind of frames the whole story, really, is a mixed race young woman who, when you go and we see her entire family makeup, so you see the Hungarian influence, you see the Afro-Caribbean influence, do you know what I mean? You see all of these different things that make her be who she is. So with a small p, I think it was also doing some politics in a really positive way, talking about multiculturalism and the joys of it.
And also the big P's are there, Sarah. Like, I was singing along to the Billy Bragg song. There's a big moment of the 1984-85 miners' strike, which is controversial in Derbyshire, because not everybody was on strike, but that audience did hold that as part of their history, that trade unionism is still with their DNA.
Yeah, and that was really important. I mean, I think you can't talk about the mining history within Derbyshire without touching on the 84-85 strike and the specifically the challenges between Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire. And again, that was done very much in conversation and consideration with those that were involved.
I can think of a lot of buildings that talk a good talk when it comes to talking to their community, but they're talking to us a tiny minutiae of their community. And I wondered what you learnt or learning about having, as you say, many doors and connecting with people that from a huge range of that's truly representative of your community in Derby and across Derbyshire.
Yeah, I think that's really true. And I think so we're just at the moment, we're doing something at the moment called our think tank strategy, where we're trying to get people to tell us what they think about Derby Theatre, what we should be doing more of, what we should be doing less of, what we should be programming, etc. And of course, the challenge is, well, it's easy to get those people who come all the time into a room and ask them what they think. But how do you get those people who don't come all the time? And it's through that really in-depth community work and partnership working and going to work with partners who might be contacting people or working with people who are just not, and saying, can we just have 10 minutes with your client group or with the people that you're meeting with and just have a chat with them, and then being prepared to hear some kind of hard truths. Do you know what I mean? And one of the people who was involved in welfare said to me, I didn't even know this place existed 2 years ago. And I was like, oh right, oh, how long have you lived in Derby? All my life. And this was this was someone who was like older than me. I was like, okay, right, that's interesting. Do you know what I mean? So it just, so I think yeah, there's no doubt about that. And I guess you're never going to get to every single part of the community in every single way. But I guess it is just about thinking.
You could personally go and knock on every single door and shake the hand of every single person, and you'd still get people who don't know what the theatre is saying, "Oh, I've never heard of you." I remember that reminds me of a story with our MP, Richard Bergen, said that he was knocking on doors and there wasn't an election on, and someone answered the door and said, "Oh, will you only ever come out when it's election time? That's when you ever come out." And he said, "But I'm here now. There's not an election on." "No, we never see you unless there's an election on. Then you will come out the woodworks." He was like, "No, there's not an election on, and I'm here now."
Yeah. Brilliant.
When you first got the job in Derby, did you like walk around Derby and you asked people directions for the playhouse? Well, and you, because it used to be the playhouse, and you'd like test out how people referred to it. What was that learning experience like? Because I bet there's not many ADs that would just crack on and do that.
Yeah, so I used to walk around Derby and pretend I was lost and ask for directions to the theatre, and then use that as a way to get into conversation about, oh, so what is it like? Is it any good or whatever? And I used to, and we also did a thing when I first arrived where we invited every hairdresser in Derby to come and see a show, because it was like, well, they're gonna then talk about it, and we tried the same with taxi drivers to lesser success. Yeah, and continue to do that. Funnily enough, I was sat waiting for my COVID jab this morning, and I was sat next to this little old woman, and I was chatting away to her, and I was just asked, just because I'm a northerner, do you know what I mean? I'm from Hull originally, so we like to gap. And I was just chatting away to her and stuff. And I said, oh, what do you do in a week? I said, you want to get yourself down to the theatre? Oh, I don't go to the theatre. Why don't you? I just asked her questions. I did then tell her who I was. I went, well, I actually work there. And she went, yeah. And I was like, yeah. So then we got into a conversation about that. But I think just showing an interest about wanting to know constantly why people feel disenfranchised from something, I think is just a really good kind of it's a good thing to have at the front of your brain at all times, I think.
There was another project, I don't know if you want to plug it, that was maybe more young people focused. I can't remember its name, but when we chatted before, we were talking about there's a very specific older white audience that came because they've got that mining history. But as you said, there's like other doors and ways of how you make it a learning building.
Yeah, so we did another project in a very similar way called Home Girl, which was just after the pandemic, where we do a lot of work with young people in care. And those young people basically said to us, like, we don't see anything that represents us. And so we just went, okay, well, what do you want to see? And we gave them the opportunity to commission something. So they commissioned a script. So they put out a call out, they met the writers, they commissioned the writers, the writers did the scripts, and they also wrote that they actually decided they wanted two writers, so they got two writers to co-write, and then those young people also it had the same budget that any other main stage show would have, and those young people also co-directed, co-designed, co-lit, all of those things. So we basically gave them like a mentor. So they had a main house designer who was mentoring them, but the design came from the young people. And then the mentor was there to kind of, make sure that it was safe to stand on and all that kind of thing. And then again, it had professionals and young people performing side by side on stage. So yeah, so we do that a lot. But also through things like so like on Friday, we had our Meet Your Neighbour event with Maison Fou, where new arrivals and refugees to the city come and they bring food, and we invite our regular audience to sit alongside them and have something to eat and drink with them. Just seeing the theatre as a more porous building. And we have 2 hubs in the city, in communities that I suppose don't traditionally come access the arts, and we program into those hubs as well. And we use our own money to do that. We don't have extra money to do that. We just decide that that's important, and we work with the steering groups in those hubs to do that. So yeah, just seeing yourself as a public service, I think.
It sounds like what you're talking a lot about, Sarah, is making a direct invite and giving someone a real purpose to be there rather than a general, this is for everyone, but the power of saying, if you are a hairdresser in Derby, you were invited to this free night for this reason. Or if you're a taxi driver, or if you're a refugee, or if you're a whoever, making a specific reason for people to come in and be like, seen, be like, oh me, oh, you want me to come, rather than just assuming that place isn't for me.
And giving people a reason to, why do you want to go there? Like, why do I choose to go to a certain pub or restaurant or gig? Do you know what I mean? Like, there's, and just thinking about it in the same way, like a poster on a wall ain't going to convince me, but if there's something very specific that's going to drag me there, then yeah, I think that's a really nice way of putting it, Natalie, actually, like giving them a direct invite.
We talk a lot on this podcast about anger and hope, but I think hope has been a key part of this conversation. Like, I do think having a building as a space that is a hopeful, forward-thinking, progressive, inclusive space. And, it really frustrates me when I see it's so easy to piss into the tent, right? But other theatres, Sarah, that Arts Council England created their Let's Create model in probably about 10 years ago now, and I think all of us working in community arts were like, well, yeah, obviously, and it's still there and it exists, and most buildings have some form of youth theatre or some participatory arts, but to really put it at the absolute heart, like, doesn't feel like a risk. It feels like it pays off.
Yeah, and I think always remembering that you're standing on the shoulders of giants. Like, I was just talking to someone the other day, like when I was working, so I'm 47 now, when I was TIE actor when I was 21, like every single cast in theatre education was a 50-50 gender split, was culturally representative, had people with disabilities involved. That was just the way it was. Like, there was no, do you know what I mean? And now, like, so we're doing loads of integrated work with the deaf community. And of course, I'm proud of that. But Grey Eye's been doing that for, 30 odd years. Definitely Theatre have been doing that for 20 odd years. So, like, just not being afraid to say, like, these people are here, they have a voice, they have great stuff to do. And as venues, if you finally getting around to doing it, well done, it's about time, rather than patting yourself on the back. I think that venues especially can really learn that. And I just think that, like, I'm so incredibly privileged to be in the position I'm in. I think I'm amazingly privileged. So you've got to, don't pull the ladder up behind you, right? You've got to keep it down and make it longer.